The more carbs, the better. Yeah, this seems to be a current trend among pro cyclists and triathletes racing endurance events. In fact, there is evidence to support that consuming up to or even over 100 grams of carbohydrates per hour can significantly enhance performance. So we thought we better try this.
Okay, I think we need to rewind a moment. I mean, where has this trend come from and what is the science to back it up? Is it one size fits all? I mean, do I really need to be having as many carbs as Mark?
Yeah, well, fortunately for us, Precision Fuel and Hydration have come to join us today to help answer these questions and to help us up our own carb intakes.
Okay, Emily, I am needing some serious conviction to try and up my carb intake because I look at all of this lot and I just feel really overwhelmed. That kind of puts me off even starting. I don't know what advice you have.
Yeah, so obviously you don't need to be taking on all of this amount of carbs here on the table. The amount of carbs you should be taking on is dependent on the duration and the intensity of the event that you're going for, and it could really be anywhere from 30 grams per hour up to 90 grams per hour or even more, and it needs to be specific to what you're training for, really. And then once you know that and you've got something to aim for, then it is about kind of going and building up to get that amount of carbs on board. The science does say the more carbohydrates that you can get in, the better, but you've obviously got that kind of level of gut comfort that you don't want to pass. But there is a dose-response relationship between performance and carbohydrates. So that means as you increase carbohydrates, your performance, you can go faster for longer, is what the science says. But obviously, there is also evidence that there's a link between higher carbohydrate intake and gut issues.
And why has the trend of carb intake gone up so much? Because I remember when it used to be, so 60 seemed a lot, and then it's suddenly 90, 100, and now we're seeing pros, over 120. Is that just from the science that's come out recently, or?
Yeah, anecdotally, we're seeing loads more athletes go over and above 90 grams per hour, but also there's just been a lot more research into looking at specifically how the gut can consume more carbohydrates. And when we do challenge the gut and take on more and more and build that gut up, we increase the amount of transporters in the gut to be able to absorb that. We can also increase what is known as gastric emptying. So that's the kind of the process where the fuel goes from your stomach to the intestine. You can kind of get used to the feeling of being full, and the bloating can reduce, and that's what reduces that kind of gut issues in the during the race.
Okay, so you sort of touched on it a little bit already, but how does one, I know for triathlon, we do our swim training, our bike training, our run training, but how do we actually go about improving all those aspects that you talked about and training our gut, so to speak? Because there's no way I could go out tomorrow and take 120 grams of carbs an hour, it would end in disaster. Yeah,
definitely. It's a bit of a process and it takes time. It can take kind of 8 to 10 weeks, and what you want to do is have a goal in mind, an event that you're building towards, and then 8 to 10 weeks out, start slowly building up. So start at a level that you can tolerate, be that even as low as 15, 20 grams per hour, and slowly week on week during your long, hard training sessions, and implement the strategy like you would on race day, but build that up. So start at 20 grams per hour. Next week it might be 25, 30, 35, and build up to, if you're aiming for 60, you want to end on 60. If you're aiming for 90, a week before you want to make sure you can tolerate 90, or even above, you might go to 100 and be able to tolerate that, and then during the race go for 90.
Okay, so you tend to try and go a bit above so that is that because of the stress of the race and things?
Yeah, it just means it's also kind of mentally, it helps you go in feeling confident. I can comfortably tolerate 100 grams per hour. I know that if I take on 90, I can do that happily, have no issues at all, and just be confident in your strategy. Okay, and is there anything outside of actually the training sessions and the carbs you're taking that you can do to help? Yeah, a little bit. I'd make sure that, as well as trialing the kind of nutrition strategy during the race and during your training sessions, I'd do it before as well. So have your usual big carby breakfast and make sure you carb load a little bit. If you're going to have a final gel about 30 minutes before for the race, have that ahead of a few of your sessions as well, just to get used to it as well.
Okay, and what about the actual volume? Because obviously you're still doing hydration with all of this carbs and the volume in your stomach. Is there any way of getting used to having that much just in there when you're exercising?
Yeah, definitely. Alongside the carbohydrates, the fluid and the sodium is really important to trial the hydration strategy alongside it. Do what you would do on race day, complete the whole package, so all the nutrition and the hydration like you would on race day, and as well as training your gut to take on more carbs, you're training your gut to get used to that volume of fluid as well.
Okay, that's a lot to take on, literally, in both senses of the word, but cool, thank you. I think it's time to be honest here. I am pretty terrible at fueling, whether that's in a race or in training, and it's partly due to the fact I do longer distance races that are very low intensity, so I tend to eat a bit of whole food and utilise fats, whereas Mark, on the other hand, is much better at it.
Yeah, I've always taken carbs on during training and racing, normally in the form of gels, carb drink, and sometimes chews if I'm doing something sort of longer in ultra racing. That said, I'm still a little off some of the targets that Emily suggested, so I'm really keen to find out how I can improve my carb intake.
I mean, let's give you a personal example. For a half marathon, I won't even dare take on a gel for fear of gastro issues. And last year, I supported a friend in a 4-hour marathon attempt, and I did it quite happily with just about 40 grams of carbs.
Well, we're both of us at opposite ends of the spectrum. I think it's a good idea for us to seek advice from the expert that we have on hand and find out actually how we go about increasing that carb intake and how much that we can tolerate and absorb. So let's head back to the office, see what Emily has to say.
Hello, back again.
Hello. Right, so we're obviously both coming in from slightly different starting places. We've got different targets and goals ahead. So we were hoping you could give us a bit of a plan to head off with.
Yeah, definitely. I know we discussed earlier kind of what you're both aiming for. A marathon in December for you, Mark.
Hopefully.
So different goals needed for the two of you. I've kind of used our fuel and hydration planner and put kind of what you said about your sweat rate, stuff like that, what you've done in the past fueling wise, all into that. And really you want to aim for over 90 grams per hour if you can. I know previously you've done more than that in some of your triathlons, but in marathons we discussed that you've maybe just done around 60.
I think, yeah, in the past, possible to do that on the bike, but I'm not sure I'm really hitting that on the run and to find it harder. I actually find it weirdly easier the slower I'm going. So on ultra marathons, I think I'm actually taking in probably similar, close to that, but as soon as I start going faster, quite hard to try and digest it all. So that is definitely where I need to improve.
Yeah, definitely. So you've got 10 weeks now to kind of work on that and do that gut training to build up to 90 grams per hour while running at that kind of high intensity. And what that means is starting probably at 60, which we know you can do now, with 2 gels an hour in your long session. So that's at least 1 session a week, starting at 60 grams per hour this week or next week, and then building that up. So that might be 70 the next week, 75, 80, and then 90. And what you want to do really for you, Mark, is go for 100 grams per hour the week out.
Okay.
Now you can comfortably tolerate that because you've done that and you've done the 90 as well a couple of times. And then going into the race, you know you're aiming for 90. And you can do that happily, 3 gels an hour, and you spread that out quite nicely, and you've done that in a lot of sessions leading up to the race, so you can go in knowing your gut's going to be happy with that.
Okay, so sort of targeting the longer runs, I guess, or the key like workouts in the week.
Yeah, definitely.
All my easy runs.
Yeah,
you
want to do
that as well, maybe.
Yeah, you'll come back buzzing. Yeah.
You want to do at least 1 long run a week with that. 2 if you can. If you're going to do another long run, why not implement the fueling strategy? Get used to it. That's also going to aid your recovery for that long run as well.
Now I'm starting at a much lower level than Mark, but hopefully also not having to go to such a high level because I'm doing an ultra, so it's going to be much lower intensity. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably one of the lower markers for you to start with, but where do we start?
Yeah, definitely. So for you going for an ultra, you're going to use more solids, obviously, in terms of what you're taking on, and you'll go for a lower amount than Mark's are. So it's going to be, if you can, build up to 60 grams per hour.
Okay.
But at the moment, you're not taking on hardly anything at all. So that's going to be starting almost as low as you can. So that might be 15, 20 grams an hour for your first session next week for a long run. And then again, build up, but build up a bit slower. So that might be going from 20 grams an hour to 25 grams an hour the week after, 30 grams an hour week on week, and you've got about 8-9 weeks.
Yeah.
And then when you finally get to the end, you should be happy to comfortably tolerate 60 grams per hour, and also practice with the type of fuel you want to take on as well. So that's for you likely going to be chews and bars and bits and pieces.
So.
Yeah, as your sessions get longer, use more real foods and find ones that you like as well that work for you.
Okay. And how much room is there for like flexibility? Like say if we miss a week of fueling or we have like a bad training week, do we then need to stay where we're at, or can we kind of keep on the plan? Is it like training would normally, we always say, oh, don't try and sort of skip on or don't try and repeat. Like what's the kind of rule when it comes to...
There's definitely a bit of flexibility. You don't have to stick to, okay, this week is 35, I have to do 35 grams per hour. For Mark, he might jump a bit more. He might be happy to go up and go to 70 and then straight to 80. For you, you might take it a bit slower. It might be slowly 45, 50. But there's definitely flexibility in that. You can just see how you feel in terms of your gut comfort after a session, know how your gut felt. And it might be the next week you stick to the same, or it might be that you jump up a bit more, just see how you feel.
And what happens if our gut doesn't tolerate it and we do find ourselves sort
in the bushes
and like we just can't seem to progress it?
Yeah, good question. What I'd do is back down a bit, go for a bit for these long sessions, use more of the sessions, try and get comfortable with the lower if you're going for 60, keep going at 60 for a bit longer before you build up, and go even slower building up from there.
Okay, and it's probably, how long's a piece of string, but I've got 2 months till my marathon. Is that a realistic time frame to potentially? I mean, I'm building sort of 20 grams, 30 grams of carbs more, so it's not masses, I guess. But is that possible? Yeah,
definitely. I think the kind of ideal time frame is 8 to 10 weeks anyway, so it's perfect. You don't really need to be doing it too further out before that and doing it too much and going too high. You want to build up, and the timing you've got is great.
You say that I'm quite interested, because what if we're trying to be like Leon, for example? Like, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to quite be like him in many ways, but like 120. Is that more like you're looking at years of doing that, because you're kind of like, you can't just keep building week by week? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Leon's been doing that for kind of 2.5 years now, and building up in his training sessions. But for a race, he will kind of build up before a race as well and make sure he can comfortably tolerate it. But for lots of his sessions, he is going for those high quantities throughout a whole year and throughout different training blocks.
Yeah, I know. I'm not going to start aiming for that.
Next year, Heather will be doing 200 grams of carbs per hour and setting new benchmarks.
I'll be flying. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I mean, that's been really interesting. If you guys have any questions, if they're not too technical, well, Mark and I will do our best to answer them. But leave them all in the comment section below. And if there's anything that we can't, we'll pass it on to these guys.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. Give it a thumbs up, give it a like.
Yeah.
See you next time.